Welcome to the Miscarriage Hope Desk podcast, where we help women struggling with recurrent pregnancy loss by sharing stories of hope and interviews with experts in the field of fertility and miscarriage. If you want to download our free lab checklist, go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/labs. Again, you will go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/LABS to download your free checklist. If you want to connect with others going through recurrent miscarriage, please check out our show notes for a link to our Facebook group. Now I'm going to hand it over to your host, Laura Bowder, for today's episode.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Miscarriage Hope Desk podcast. Today I have Natascha Hebell-Fernando with me. She is an integrative medicine practitioner and an acupuncturist. So, Natascha, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be on your podcast today.
I'm excited to dive into all the different topics that we have to discuss. But first, I want to give you a chance to tell us a little bit more about you and what you do.
Yes. So as you mentioned, I am in the integrative holistic medicine field, and I got there actually because of my own infertility struggles and actually unintended childlessness. I decided to go back to school, and that was a way for me to offer more nurturing to the world. And I at first did not really deal with the fact that we never had children and my own, struggles with that. And it's only very recently that I realized that I had never really processed all the trauma associated with that. And that's what prompted me to really become more visible online and to offer specific coaching and just support services for women that have experienced, recurrent miscarriages, infertility, and maybe even, a life without children, own biological children.
Yeah, that's such important work, and I think it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Would you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about your personal experience with us?
Yes, of course. I have been married now for 25 years. So we got married in 1995. And I remember at the time we were just so excited to start a family. We really, when we, before we got married, we looked for stuff for our registry, and we were really looking for, things for babies and children. And so, what happened for a couple of years, you just kind of try and you see, okay. And then we went to the reproductive endocrinologist, and did some tests and some exams, and everything was really looking fine, but we never really did get pregnant. We had some just a few assisted transfers, but we decided not to move forward just because my body was not responding well at all to the different shots, and even the miscarriages that weren't really official, but I know we did have those. It was just very difficult to even talk about it. There was at the time, really in the late 90s or early 2000, where do I go to? There was no Facebook. There was really no way to Google things, and it was super, super lonely, and I didn't have anybody to talk to. So what happened is that I kind of put that pain aside. We just decided to, if it happens, it happens. But there never was really any closure or way to how to move forward. So for me, like I said, I put it somewhere, safely tucked away, because it was a super emotional time for me to, go to all the baby showers and, seeing those babies grow up and actually wanting to be a better auntie for them. But I couldn't. I just, at an emotional level, I just could not. I really had to shut down my feelings to be able to make it through the day, because one, you would come across women that just got pregnant, or you see little babies, you go to Target, you see the baby section, or you just have these moments, and I just had to kind of shut it down, because how else do I survive that, right? And then just looking back at my life, I started running, I got really active, I was like doing a lot at work. And then I got to a point where I'm like, you know what, I want to go back to school. So that's when I, became an acupuncturist and expanded into holistic medicine. And when I was then working in my own health clinic, I consciously chose not to work with fertility or infertility. I just had never seen a woman that was with child, except in my, practice clinic, to get my hours. But I chose not to work with women from that perspective because it was just too painful emotionally. And even over the years, as I, was in my mid 40s, I thought I was okay. And I would still have these moments when I would, especially, for example, seeing my cousin having her children, so my nephews, then graduate from high school and going to university. I mean, I could just not really handle it, but I still kind of tucked it away. I kind of knew I had to work with that. And then I just got to a point where I got really burned out in my acupuncture and holistic clinic, which is kind of ironic because I should know better. But then I realized I really sat with that. It took some more time off. I still, have been seeing patients ever since, but it was just at a lot slower pace. And I realized that a lot of my underlying patterns of kind of overwork and adrenal fatigue, it all kind of came back to the fact that I never really had processed the grief and the trauma. Literally, I was, I just had this aha moment that every month I was getting my period was actually somewhat of a trauma, because every time after that, there was always like this hope, right? There's always this glimmer of hope until like very recently, still in my late 40s. I thought, well, you never know, it could be happening. Now I'm 54. Now I know it's really not going to happen, but it was like this every month, there's like this little glimmer of hope that then is destroyed when you get your period. And then you're like, you're like at work in a bathroom and you just want to like curl up in a ball and cry, but no, you have to get out and, do your presentation and just move through the day or whatever it is. And so that has been my journey. And it took me a very long time to realize where actually even some of my own health problems were coming from. And I really think it's because I just did not have the support. I didn't acknowledge that I needed the support. I didn't accept, a kind of childless, not by choice future. And yeah, so I had to really kind of pick myself up and put the pieces back together. And I realized that the process that I was kind of using with my client and patients was something that I could apply to myself. And then that's really something that I have incorporated now with my program when I work with my clients that specifically need help to move from that stage of being in that heartache and hopelessness and the what ifs, should I have tried harder and all of that, to get to that point where that can be transformed into something that lights up your heart, into like a path that, makes your heart sing. And it just takes some work, it takes some time, and you have to work through your grief and you have to just get to that point of acceptance. But I also know from personal, not just from personal experience, but even having women that I've talked to that are even in their 60s and their 70s, and there still are these triggers where you have this dagger in your heart where you're like, wow, I really miss that. And you might shed a tear or two, but then how to get back into that alignment with who you truly are as a person and as a soul.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be so difficult to kind of navigate through this in a time. I think a lot of us are used to now being able to go on Facebook or to find support online for these things. So did you have anybody else in person that you were talking to about this, or was it just kind of a conversation between you and your husband and nobody else really knew exactly what you guys were going through?
Well, initially we didn't really speak up too much. And then I have to say, I love my husband dearly, but husbands just, or at least my husband was emotionally not as available to understand what I was going through, and I know that he suffers in his own way, and he has processed all of it in his own way. But it was definitely so different than from, a woman's perspective, feeling, ovulated, the ovulation every month, going to a little bit of PMS every month, getting your period, and just this constant reminder. And so when we did open up, it was actually very disheartening, I have to say, because a lot of our family and friends just could not understand the pain we were going through. They were really just making fun of it, which in per se is also a very traumatic event.
Sure.
I mean, I still have this reel in my head of some people tell me, well, just do it. I mean, how hard can it be? And I'm like, you have no idea what I've been going through.
Yeah.
Or having somebody that's very close to you tell you, well, I hardly ever had my period, but I just took Clomid for 2 weeks and I got pregnant, and it's like, oh my God, it's like there's just not this emotional depth of understanding what you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I talked, I'm an only child, so with my parents, my mother couldn't really relate. I know my dad really wanted to have grandchildren, so he was kind of pushing me to, not really pushing me, but he suggested I move further along with, IVF and other tools. And I said, no, this is just, my husband and I had both decided we did not want to pursue that, just from, we felt it was emotionally just too heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And even adoption was something that it just never felt right to us. Plus, I had heard of some stories that if that would happen to me, that I'm ready to accept a child into our world, and then this doesn't go through, it would literally break my heart. I would just not have the fortitude to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had looked into some organizations, but I felt they were all kind of like more, I know this is kind of a bad term, like pity parties. It's like, I wanted to have something that was uplifting. And honestly, I had to find that for myself. There was really nothing out there at the time that supported me. And so then later on, I did do some searches on Facebook, and there are many different groups out there. And I have to say, some of them are really great because you can just rant, you can just talk about things that nobody else will understand, which is very therapeutic. But then what happened is, I thought I wanted to be in a space that was just, would give me some hope and that was uplifting. And that's why I created my own group, where I use, my own tools, and where just from my kind of nurturing perspective and the way I want to connect with people, it has been very helpful for me. It's helpful because I heal at a certain level when I am able to help other women that are going through, the recurrent losses and the infertility, or having to deal with, hysterectomy still when you're young, and just knowing you will never have that biological child. And so, yeah, I have this group that it's a really sacred and safe space where I'm able to share, what kind of worked for me, and we all kind of hold the space for each other. And I just love that.
Yeah, that's I'm sure that helps so many women, and I totally understand what you mean too, that being able to help other women through these experiences is something that's really healing for you as well. What do you think is one of the biggest struggles that you had to overcome, or that you've seen other women have to overcome with these decisions about how to move forward, and whether to take some of those steps like you mentioned toward IVF or adoption, or whether to remain childless?
I think there are different struggles. I think one very, very big struggle is just what our expectations are, just from society point of view and from our role. So because when we, let's say in the traditional sense, we get married, then kind of like the next step is to, start a family, or even getting to a certain age, like before 35, you want to have your child. And so there are kind of like these expectations, I feel like, in society, that being a mother is like a certain ritual or certain kind of standard you have to kind of go through. And I think that's just wrong, because very often we get these messages, and it's often very subtle, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And it's it's called like pronatalism, you know, where you see everywhere it's like the mother, like as a mother you wouldn't be, you know, how this feels, or as a parent you would never understand what real love feels like until, you know, you've held your child, or things like that. And people are just really completely unaware on how limiting that is to the potential of a person. So I feel like really big struggles are just the expectations, our own expectations, the expectations of our parents, our family, and our society. Also, in, you know, in different cultures. For example, my husband is Filipino. My background, I'm actually from Germany, and it's so different how these different cultures approach childlessness. Like from my family, it's not a big deal. I wasn't asked that much, but in my husband's culture, literally the second question after like, what is your name, is how many children do you have? And to this day, I have to answer this question, which is very often met by either like, oh, good for you. And I'm like, well, that's not really what my choice was. You know, it's actually really quite insensitive of you to assume that I did not want to have children. And so it's kind of like also an educational aspect to tell people when they say, well, why don't you just adopt? Well, it's not that simple, that we have to educate people. But if you are still grieving a lot, it just takes a superhuman effort to not start crying on the spot, or to like not want to punch them in the face, you know, but being able to tell them, you know, think that through, because it's not that simple. So I think that's like the major struggle, I feel like, what's going on the outside, because that doesn't help. And the second struggle is, I think it's the trauma, and laying bare all our beliefs that, you know, are really deep down, everybody has, like, of not being good enough, or I'm a failure, or, you know, all those kind of things, which become amplified through our process of trying and not being able to reach our greatest wish. And I think that just becomes just huge, that our self-confidence is shot, our trust in ourselves, the trust in our body, trust in life just kind of goes away. And to work through that, it just takes a lot of kindness and forgiveness and compassion. And it's really helpful to have somebody that can talk you and help you work through that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that, you know, you mentioned something about how you wanted to be in a space where people were supportive and you saw a way to move forward, rather than kind of going through this cycle of just feeling, you know, I don't know, what's the word, feeling like sorry for yourself, or just feeling like you weren't good enough. Like at some point you wanted to find something that was more supportive, and you created something like that. So I'm wondering what advice you have for women who are going through this right now, and they're dealing with those feelings of grief and trauma that you were talking about, that you had kind of pushed down over time. And how do you work through that when it's still one of your big dreams or goals in life to have children?
Yes, you know that there are different steps, and I think at different moments we are at these different steps. And so whoever's listening right now, just see kind of like what resonates with you. And so, and again, these different steps, they're not like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then check, check, check. It's just kind of like a matrix of different things. It's not a linear process. But I think the first place to start is to kind of get an understanding of who you are, that you're not just, you know, a person. Like, understand your life, the different facets of your life, which includes not just like your physical health and your family health, but also, let's say, your career, your passions, your financial health, your mental and spiritual well-being. Just kind of get an understanding that you're so much bigger than what you feel right now, because grief really contracts us. You know, we're not really taking up space here in this world, in this universe. So just to kind of do a little bit of an analysis of the picture of your life, how it looks like, and what are the different areas that are there, just to kind of get like a status quo, and then get to accept it. And that is really, really difficult. But to be able to say, you know what, this is where I'm at. Like, I can't change it. We can't change the past. All I have is like this moment right now at this time. This is where I'm at, and kind of accept that. But within that acceptance, look for an opportunity to create. Just think, okay, now that I know where I'm at, I can look for some kind of possibilities. And then the next step is really to look at ourselves. How can I take care of myself and love myself? And I know this sounds quite cliche, but it's really to look into, do some journaling. And it doesn't have to be anything difficult, but do something that makes your heart feel comfortable, and forget about the word should. If you think you should, write 10 pages, no, you don't. You can only just write one sentence. Or if you think you should do meditation, if you really hate it, don't do it. What does your heart tell you? If you are better off, going on a 3-mile run, then do that. Or if you want to just lay on the couch all day, do that for today. And look into some self-care practices. So this is what I teach my clients. It's like acupressure or emotional freedom technique, or just some other things that kind of help you reset your nervous system, because you have to kind of recover from that trauma. So I think it's a really big thing to start how to listen, learn again how to listen to your little inner voice, because we are pulled in so many different directions, by experts. And this is what these people did. And, this is what my mom tells me what to do. This is what my husband thinks we should do.
Mm-hmm.
Just really start listening to that inner voice, because you want to get into alignment. And to get into that alignment, what feels right for you, you have to create that kind of sacred space within you to start listening to that voice again. And so the one most important thing is to, take a breath, like before you do anything, and like, how does this feel to me? And when you start doing it, you realize how many things don't feel good to your soul, really. And then just be more aware, because once you have that awareness, like, oh my God, I really hate doing whatever that is, just realize, okay, so maybe I can do less of that and do more of something that really makes your heart sing. And so once you have that alignment, you can really step into, owning your story and tell your story the way it is. Because very often when we tell our story, even for what I just mentioned earlier today, I know that my husband would tell me I should just count my blessings. And I do understand that it's very valuable, but I still have to be able to express how painful it was for me every single month to have a period, and feeling like hating my body at certain moments, because I'm like, everything is working, then why don't I have a child? It's like,
Right.
So once you have that alignment, you can really work into owning your story, and then feeling empowered, become your own best advocate, and expand into what I call your fearless future. That's where you want to get. And so again, this is not a linear process, but I want everyone to know, and I always quote Oprah, even though I'm not really such a big fan of hers, but she has this great quote, which is, so I have to give her credit for that. It's like, your wounds are your wisdom. And so, reflecting on that, it's really all the challenges and what you suffer through. It gives you such emotional depth, such an empathy, and, an experience that not many people have felt, these feelings of, deep despair, and having to help to pick yourself up so many times, and being able to like get up in the morning and be productive, and smile at people even though you don't feel like it. But it gives you a certain power to improve this world in so many different ways. You can really shine your light. And once you work to the acceptance and taking care of yourself, love yourself, find that alignment, find your voice, you can truly make this world a better place, and trust that you will find whatever will make your heart sing. So that's like my message.
Well, I love that. And I love that you made that comment about removing the shoulds, because I think that people in general, but I feel like especially women can be very prone to putting a lot of shoulds on themselves. And one of the biggest shoulds in our society, as you're talking about, is should be a mother.
Yeah.
And for many different reasons, there are lots of women who aren't mothers, who either wanted to be but aren't for various reasons, or who didn't want to be. And I think there's probably a lot of people listening who might be thinking, well, when should I make this decision? Like when does it hit the point where I decide, okay, am I
Yes.
going to be childless? Am I going to move toward IVF or adoption? And it's such a personal decision that I really don't think anything other than what you just advised, really taking the time to get in touch with yourself and to feel more aligned and to listen to that inner voice. Those are really the only things that I think anybody can tell you that you should do, because other than that, it's just such a personal choice.
It is. It is a very personal choice, and it has to feel right to you, And I remember very well when my husband and I decided not to move forward with fertility treatments. And, we had a lot of people tell us that that was the wrong decision, but we had to go with what felt right in our hearts, even though it was super painful. And even though we had some moments, some what if moments, but we just knew that that was just the right decision for us. And it has led us to, explore things we couldn't have explored if we would have had children. I mean, we have had, some great experiences, and yes, there are also some painful experiences, but we just had to trust that process, that this was right for us. And I think looking back, yes, I wouldn't change it now. And I just know we had to have that inner fortitude, because you will be, a lot of people will try to change your mind, and you have to just be comfortable with your own decision. And, you might still change it. It doesn't say that it has to stay like that forever. But if you are with a partner, I think you have to reach that decision together and just really do some soul searching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such an important message. So really appreciate you sharing that with us today. I know that we're going to share this in the show notes, but you have a webinar and some other resources for the audience if you want to describe to them what will be in the show notes for them.
Yeah, sure. So I participated at the actually World Childless Week a couple of weeks ago. So I do have a recorded webinar there where I talk about the steps towards moving forward that I mentioned to you earlier. And I also have a handout that comes with it that talks about the different affirmations that can help during those different steps. And I do have a free Facebook group, Beyond Infertility and Unintended Childlessness. It's a safe and sacred space for all of us to connect. I do typically a weekly live where I talk to some of the self-care techniques like acupressure, visualizations, or just some other health and wellness tips. And it's just a good space where we can connect and talk about some of the triggers and how to deal with it. And overall, it's just a very, like I said, a safe and sacred space to allow for healing and moving forward.
Great. Well, all of those resources will be in the show notes. Natascha, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our show notes for details on joining our Facebook group and for following along on Instagram. If you would like a free recurrent pregnancy loss lab checklist, go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/labs. Again, that's miscarriagehopedesk.com/LABS to get your free downloadable checklist. And for even more resources, visit the Miscarriage Hope Desk website, where we have stories of hope plus an entire library of evidence-based research articles related to fertility and miscarriage. If you enjoyed this episode, I would so appreciate it if you rate, reviewed, and subscribed to the Miscarriage Hope Desk podcast. Your ratings and reviews will help others to find us. I want to wrap up by saying that if you are going through a miscarriage, my heart goes out to you, and as difficult as your experience may be, I want you to know that you are not alone and that you will find a path forward.